All right, let's do this again.
Do it again. Good cut.
Good practice.
We set now?
I think we're actually live now.
We're actually live now?
We just ran a whole conversation
Nice.
without it actually going live.
Nice.
There was another button I had to push on my end
You
that I
got to
wasn't
press
aware
the
of.
buttons. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Liberty Portal Podcast Live Edition. We are sans Joe, our wonderful ginger tech guy who actually runs all this stuff, and we just kind of show up. He is out gallivanting around the world and is not available to edit, so we are trying this out live. So thanks for tuning in and listening to us talk about the news. My name is David Rand. I'm here to talk a little libertarian philosophy and run this ship. I'm in the captain's seat of sorts. We have here Henri Pellerin bringing the wisdom, Kyle Mack on the buttons pushing, hopefully keeping us live, and throwing in those super chats. Let them know what you think about what we're saying. I would love to respond to it, and we'll read them live. And then lastly, we have Evan in the back pushing the buttons, keeping the noise sounding good. So, big topics. There's some news coming up this week. We have Tucker Carlson obviously out at Fox News. We have some interesting stories when it comes to Jerome Powell getting pranked by a fake Zelensky phone call, revealing some interesting, his probably more real thoughts about what he would usually say in public. He dropped on this prank phone call to a pretend Zelensky. Fauci has a big Times article where he simultaneously claims that the COVID response was a giant disaster and he takes no responsibility for it. So, and we got other stories we're going to hit on too. So please stick around, share this, comment, throw something in that super chat, and let's try to get some other viewers in here. Throw them around to your friends and neighbors and say, hey, do these guys a favor, take a look at it, see if you can, see if you're interested by what they're saying. Cool. So Henri, Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, man?
Well, it's everybody's talking about it at the moment. It's I think Tucker is going to be fine through all this. Fox News seems to be shooting themselves in the foot. Their ratings are way down, probably going to be down even more tonight. And it's just interesting looking at the overall media landscape of, Tucker Carlson out at Fox News, Don Lemon out at CNN, Nate Silver let go from 538.com, James O'Keefe no longer part of Project Veritas. Like, things are changing in a big way. I can't help but think maybe that with Tucker in particular, it has something to do with taking away the most prominent, I guess, populist voice in America as we lead up to the election cycle. I also wonder if it has something to do with taking away one of the most popular consistently anti-war voices on the national media landscape.
That's an interesting one because he was on a podcast just beforehand where he made a couple big statements, philosophically big statements. Well, one, his greatest regret in his life was shilling for the Iraq War. That's huge. And I appreciate the humility there. I mean, as someone who, as a young man thought that the Iraq War was from a very much neoconservative lens at first, before I got old enough to really understand the history and really understand, even moral thinking in foreign policy, I appreciate that pivot. Doing it so publicly was a heck of a thing to say. Additionally, that he also makes the point that from his perspective, the media is a consent control machine. That's what exists to do, and that so much of the mainstream media, at least, and maybe other kinds of media, I don't know, exist to generate people's consent for what what the network has planned or what the network really desires. And there's other comments too that people say that because of the Dominion case that this is the reason why. Additionally to that he has a hostile workplace accusation going on at Fox News. We also have the irony of the pattern that you're noticing is that he hired the same lawyer that Don Lemon hired to try to get, workplace decision out of the courts on this whole separation.
Yeah, I love Ryan Long had a hilarious tweet where he posted the headline for that article about, Tucker and Don Lemon hiring the same lawyer. He's like, tell me this wouldn't be the best plot for like a buddy comedy movie. two unlikely friends coming together.
Yeah. So Lemon may have been fired due to the response, or at least maybe it was the final straw from a interview with a presidential candidate that we've talked about in the podcast before, Vivek Ramaswamy. We were hoping to play a reaction here, and let's see if we can do it live. We believe in you, Kyle.
Just keep. I wasn't expecting that
Keep
hard
going
pivot.
quickly.
Just give me a little.
I thought that was a smooth transition there. I mean,
Sorry,
come
I
on.
was captivated by all the people in the chat. We got like 10 people in here right
Woo! 10. We're into double
Yeah.
digits, son. Cheers to you guys.
now. All right, so yeah, I'm pulling up the thing right now. Oh my God, I have such a bigger screen than I do when I'm in the back right now. But right now, make sure the audio's good.
Let us know if you guys can't hear it.
Yeah.
The Second Amendment was
Black
part
people,
of
wait, hang on,
that
please.
freedom.
I cannot keep a thought if you guys are talking to me in my ear.
Wait.
So hang on one second. So to say that
Sorry, did I start from the beginning? I don't think I started
Yeah, I
from the
think you
beginning.
did. I think this
Yeah.
is just a short
Oh,
clip.
it's short clip. Okay.
But this is
Sorry.
really where it gets down to the racism accusation.
Yeah, I'll get it re-going right here now.
With due respect, I find your explanation reductive and actually insulting, including to Black Americans, to say that Black people today, compared to 1964, 1865, haven't made progress in part because of the freedoms we secured. And the Second Amendment was
Black
part
people,
of
wait,
what
hang
secured
on,
that
please.
freedom.
I cannot keep a thought if you guys are talking to me in my ear. So hang on one second. So to say that Black people, say what you said again.
Black people secured their freedoms after the Civil War. It is a historical fact, Don. Just study it. Only after their Second Amendment rights were secured.
They
That's
were
a
not
fact.
secured their freedoms after the Civil War. That is not, you are discounting Reconstruction. You're discounting a whole host of things that happened after the Civil War when it comes to African Americans, including the whole reason that the Civil Rights Movement happened is because Black people did not secure their freedoms after the Civil War, and that things turned around. People tried to change the freedoms that were supposed to
And you know how
happen
they
after
got
the
it?
Civil War
They got their
and
Second Amendment
Reconstruction.
rights, and they actually got the NRA played a big role in that. But today, Don,
The NRA did not play a big role
absolutely,
in
they trained
that.
Black Americans how to use firearms.
That's a lie. That's not. The NRA did not play a big role in
This is
that.
just historical fact.
It's
But Don,
not historical fact.
the part that I
Just
find
because you say it's historical
the
fact.
part that I
it's not
find
historical fact.
insulting is when you say today Black Americans don't have those rights after we have
The
gone
fact
through
that I
civil
find
rights
insulting
revolution in
is
this
that
country.
you are sitting here telling an African American about the rights and what you find insulting about the way I live, the skin I live in every day.
Here's where you and I
know
have
the
a different
freedoms
point
that
of view.
Black and white that Black people don't have in this country, and that Black people do have.
Well, here's where you and I have a different point of view. I think we should be able to express our views regardless of the color of our skin. We should have this debate
I'm not saying you
without
shouldn't
me
express your
regarding you
views,
as a
but I
Black
think it's
man,
insulting that
but
you're
me
sitting
regarding you
here,
as a fellow citizen.
That you're
That's what I
sitting
think we
here,
should see.
whatever ethnicity you are, explaining to me
Whatever ethnicity
about
I'm, I'll
what
tell
it's
you.
like to be Black. in
Whatever
America.
ethnicity I am, I'll tell you what I am. I'm an Indian American. I'm proud of it. But I think we should have this debate. Black, white doesn't matter.
I think we should have this
on
debate.
the content of the
If you're
ideas.
gonna do it, you should do it in an honest way and in a
I
fair
think-
way. And what you're doing is not an honest and fair way. Okay?
With-
But we
with-
appreciate you coming on.
With
Thank
due
you for that.
respect, Don, I look forward to
Thank you very
continuing
much.
that
I appreciate
conversation.
it. We'll
Thank
continue
you.
the conversation.
Thank you.
so much.
Thank you, Papa.
We'll talk about China.
Yes, let's talk
next
about China.
time you come back.
Oh, thank you. Much to say on declaring independence from China.
Okay,
Something you
can
can
we move
add
on now, please?
Thank you.
Wow. Vivek is so classy there. I mean, I can't imagine having someone play that card that way and him reacting so well. I really respect him for that. I think that was tremendously well done. And standing up for, the NRA isn't perfect. I'm more of a gun owners of America sort of guy. But they do play an important historical role in securing civil liberties for minorities in the Second Amendment. And that's a huge deal. And the fact that someone who, because he has such a hard bias against the NRA, could just deny that completely and just completely forget about that.
Right.
And get so caught up in his Don Lemon's own personal view that, of course, progress couldn't have happened because we had to have civil rights. Well, yeah, you're right. It wasn't perfect, Don Lemon, but there was progress. We got to think of this marginally, and that doesn't mean you're stealing the he's diminishing the contributions of a lot of people over that time fighting for the rights of African Americans in America before civil rights. Those things didn't just not happen. Those things happened, and he needs to recognize that.
Yeah, I rolled my eyes at Don Lemon just kind of trying to steamroll the conversation and saying, well, it's not a historical fact just because you say it's a historical fact, without offering any kind of like real counter argument. He's just trying to, enforce his will. But I think this is a big moment for Vivek in the early part of his campaign. A lot of people just found out who he was, and he sort of went into CNN and was like a torpedo missile that took out Don Lemon. Because a lot of people are pointing to this particular moment as the thing that was the last straw for Don Lemon's tenure at CNN.
Yeah, I believe it was Don Lemon who had a series of other gaffes as well as who was the
woman one. He went like full Andrew Tate and kind of made his co-host.
Well, he asked
very uncomfortable.
Yeah, very uncomfortable. It was like a whole age thing. It was just like, well, women in their prime kind of a thing, right?
Yeah.
And it made everybody uncomfortable. But also in response to on the Vivek stuff, he's the first millennial candidate, I believe, that's ever announced he's running for president. And it does seem like he's kind of like the first digital candidate. Like he's already launched a podcast as part of his campaign. Most of these like third rail candidates, they always launch a podcast after their campaign, but it's actually like a driving force in getting people to him, right? I find him fascinating. He's speaking a lot of things that I agree with, and he's like very technically, he understands a lot of the dynamics of what's going on with like the ESG stuff and all that whole movement. He comes from Wall Street and pharmaceutical companies, so he's kind of seen the behind the scenes stuff on the regulatory side there. I find him fascinating. I think he's going to be an Overton window shifter. Curious to see where he goes. I think he's going to be in here for the long haul too. Like he's going to be one of those candidates where I don't think he wins, but he's going to force candidates to make certain positions. Like I know he's very much attacking Ron DeSantis right now on a lot of stuff. So yeah, he's just an interesting fella. I like him.
Real quick question on the live stream. When we're looking at the thing here, is that showing what's currently being sent out, or is that the past?
There's a delay. There's a delay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So don't get distracted by that.
No, I thought maybe we were just playing the thing on loop.
No, I thought I would bring the
super chats.
I thought I would bring this. Yeah, the
That's
chats
cool.
for you guys to see them just in case.
Thanks for the support,
Yeah,
guys.
some familiar faces. Liam's in here. Our buddy Zach.
Thanks, guys.
Liam McCullum, great follow on Twitter.
Yeah.
Joe's in here too.
Nice.
Watching from Ireland, from across the pond,
It's like
from his
midnight over there.
motherland. Yeah. It's only 6 hour difference. So.
Oh, okay. So, news story. We got Fauci out with a New York Times expose, which is very long and very detailed. And it definitely, overall it portrays him as this guy who's, I'm a doctor and I saw these people suffer and I don't want to see anyone suffer and I'm motivated really well. And I'm, fine. I'll take him at his motivations. But one of the things that really frustrates me about this article was how he simultaneously admits how much of a disaster all the COVID response was, while also taking no responsibility at all for it and calling for forgiveness for how bad it was, while him not taking responsibility for how bad it was in the first place. I mean, come on. Additionally to that, blaming everybody else but him in that, because what was really the problem was polarization, was the fact that people just didn't believe him enough. Come on, man. It's like an Ayn Rand novel. That's what really bothers me about it.
Which novel in particular?
Atlas Shrugged. In Atlas Shrugged, there's a train crash. I know that is ironic from all the train crash coverage we've given, but there's a train crash, and one of the things that happens is it does this really great job about showing the escalation of people not taking responsibility up the train of authority till it gets to the very top. And then what happens? People go into a tunnel that shouldn't have gone into a tunnel, and they die from carbon dioxide poisoning, right? And it's just a classic, like we're stuck in this realm and age of not taking responsibility for our mistakes. And all he has to do, he's no longer a public official. All he has to do is like, yeah, guys, I screwed up, my bad.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how he can admit to that, but it's always true of any sort of government authority. Whenever things are going their way, so to speak. I think in the early, especially part of the pandemic, Fauci was looked at as kind of this, potential savior of the crisis. And, I remember seeing positive coverage of Fauci from pretty much all corners. As it went on, the tune started to change, but it's always the case that whenever things are going okay, look at how great of a job I'm doing. And then when there's things aren't going so well, it was, suddenly my magic powers are no longer effective. And it's everybody's fault but mine. I mean, that reminds me of like the Federal Reserve. Whenever the economy is going well, it's because the Fed is dutifully managing the economy, and Alan Greenspan is the maestro and all this. And whenever the economy is tanking, it's look at capitalism needs another bailout.
Right.
It's same story, different day.
Yeah. And another one that's happening right now, Randy Weingarten, who's the president of the federal, pretty much the mega union of public teachers, has came out and had an interview on that was featured on Zero Hedge, but it was actually in committee. Let me get this right. Sorry, guys. That the American Federation of Teachers claimed this week that in front of the House Select Subcommittee on Coronavirus Pandemic, the her organization, quote, spent every day from February on trying to get schools open, adding, "We know that remote education was not a substitute for reopening schools." And that is so frustrating because that is completely counter to every experience that every person who was politically aware at the time had with public schools and the public employee union. That everything that you could do, if you did a protest, it was always suspect as being, you're gonna let grandma die. If you did anything that at all criticized the COVID regime at the time, with your free speech, you were immediately shamed by the kind of folks that Randy ran around with. Not to mention in her public statements leading up to this entire, leading up to the end of COVID, was of course saying how many people they saved by closing down the schools. It's absolutely lying to Congress, literally. So, yeah, another person not taking responsibility for what they did.
Liam made an interesting point in the chat here. I was just kind of reading through here. He was talking about how quite a bit of big changes have happened at CNN, because you even had Brian Stelter get fired. I don't know if you saw the clip. This wasn't something we had on the docket, but if we wanted to pull it, I could. Where Brian Stelter was kind of reflecting on his, leaving and reliable sources getting canceled. And
was that when he was at the World Economic Forum?
No, it was actually much more recent. It was like a week ago.
Oh.
He had a clip saying I don't know why they fired me, kind of like a thing. I actually pulled here. Let me pull this. I think it might be enlightening. Here's from Not the Bee.
It's the kind of perfect.
Oh, no, this isn't a good video. I wish I could test these things before I go through. Oh, here, I think we're live here. Never mind. Don't listen to me. I'm not using this video. This isn't the right video. But it was interesting where there was no real self-reflection in, because really what his job was at Reliable Sources was just to slam on Fox News all the time. It was just I hate Tucker Carlson. Here's what Tucker Carlson's all about. And then just slams on him. And it's but everybody else is doing fine. That was his role in the media. So it was just kind of interesting to see that he also got fired not too long ago, along with Don Lemon now too.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
So other big story that's hitting national news. I got several text messages from what is going on in Montana after 7 people were arrested in the Capitol building for a protest that got a little out of hand when. I can give the background. Do you want to give the background?
No, you're very much more qualified.
I mean, you're involved in legislature, so
no,
neither of us
are.
I saw a 2-minute video on Twitter.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. So Zoe Zephyr is a trans legislator. Goes by she/her pronouns. Zoe was commenting on a trans bill. This is a minor transition surgery bill, basically banning till you're 18 minor transition drugs, hormone replacement therapy, puberty blockers, things like that, and physical top bottom surgery, that stuff for minors. Oh, by the way, before I go further, I am trying to get out of the way. I noticed my shoulder is in that shot.
Yeah,
Evan,
I was going to say something.
Tell me this stuff, man. My bad. So I'm back now. Am I out of the shot now, Evan?
Yes. Yeah,
okay,
you're good.
Cool. All right, I will try to not lean forward.
Or if you can scoot your chair back maybe a little bit, that might help.
All right, that was a little weird. Okay,
yeah,
so
bring your mic with you a little bit.
You know we're live.
Boom. Yeah, no.
First live stream.
It's definitely in the back of my head. We're doing it live. So Zoe was commenting on a bill, and we covered this a little bit last podcast because I thought it was going to be a peak there, but it did not. It peaked this week, far more so. There was a disciplinary action on something that she said on the House floor. What it was in talking about that trans bill, the transgender point of view is that, if someone is trans, regardless of when they realize that, they need surgery and other kind of medical interventions in order to preserve and transition to the body that they need. And that will prevent them from, self-harm. The right wing is kind of in a position where they're saying, well, look, these are minors. This is a permanent decision. We don't allow minors to do this. We should, push this ban. I'm not saying good or bad. I'm personally on the side of the right wing on this one, but I think that there's a pretty substantial, there's an argument on both sides there that needs to be made. So in making her point, Zoe said, when you pray, and they always do an invocation before the next session. When you pray, I want you to look down your hands and see the blood on them for doing what you're doing with this bill. Because their argument is these people will commit suicide if you do this bill. The House Freedom Caucus and other members of the Montana legislature called for censure, basically saying, hey, that's over the line. There's a line there and you crossed it. We feel like that was too much rhetoric. That rhetoric was a little too brutal. Most of the time when that happens, it's happened before. The legislator says, my bad, and then everyone moves on. I've talked to a couple of different legislators about those previous circumstances, and they were pretty similar to this, where someone just got tired of someone else saying something, so they said, hey, this is over the top, and then finally there was a check. There's kind of like this dynamic culture in the legislature where you're trying to keep what's called decorum and make sure that the discussions are productive. And, sometimes legislators not knowing or knowing can get jump the shark, if you will, on their rhetoric. So with this case, Zoe refused to apologize. The speaker then refused to call on Zoe until she apologized. And then after that, there was a protest at the Capitol this week. This week?
I think it was earlier this week.
Yeah,
Monday,
week.
I believe, was when the arrest happened.
Weeks
I
are
believe
going
it
by
was
slow. Yeah, right. So protest at the Capitol. With that protest, a lot of people came to the Capitol. They filled up the gallery. So in the Montana legislature, there's the floor, and then there's this gallery that sits above it where the public can sit. That's always been very much managed by the security that runs the legislature. Was not a problem. It filled all up. But then when Zoe put the mic up in the air and basically was asking to be talked to, and the speaker still refused to call on her because you can't talk until the speaker calls on you. That's what turns your mic on. The crowd kind of erupted. Someone threw something. I don't know what it was, but someone threw something, and that's been underreported to the House floor. There was a lot of shouting, including shouting, "This is our house." Whose house? Our house. Which is ironic to say to the representatives in a representative democracy. And then additionally to that, just like we will not be silenced, like chants like that basically kept the House floor from doing business. The security of sorts, I'm forgetting what they're called right now, as well as the Department of Highway Patrol, who has the contract for the legislature, I think, came in and removed those folks from the floor. Most people left easily and complied with the law. 7 people did not, and they were arrested. Including one person who happened to work for the ACLU, which I think was interesting. Yeah. So the $25,000 was raised in like a day on GoFundMe to pay for their court bills, those 7 people, which is pretty wild. And that's where we wind up now. Zoe still is censored. In fact, they actually did a vote yesterday or today to kick her out of the actual House floor. So now Zoe is actually posted up outside that floor on like a bench where she's doing her work from there. And it's quite an interesting dynamic, unprecedented. There's a lot of veteran reporters. Mike Dennison today, for example, tweeted that all in his 35 years of reporting, never has anything close to this happened, which is interesting.
Well, as far as nothing like this has happened in the state of Montana.
Yeah.
Because, we've seen in other state houses in Tennessee and where was the other one? It was somewhere in the Midwest, Kentucky or something. These I guess trans activists storming their state capitol buildings and kind of taking it over with protests. And it just goes to show, that's just kind of my big takeaway from this is almost no matter where you are, the political culture of the nation is really, it's everywhere. It's not just, San Francisco and New York and DC. In Montana, people moved here during the pandemic to get away from, the kind of pervasiveness of the far right or far left. And yet, here we are at the center of national story about exactly that. So
yeah,
I guess that's my one takeaway from kind of observing this story. I mean, I haven't dug into it as much as you have, but I mean, everybody, all the major outlets and talking heads are talking about it or mentioned it. So
one of the things that frustrates me about it is that we had a bill came up that would effectively allow so what we have a problem on campus free speech in Montana, where there's and lots of states do, where there is the Montana State University system can basically say you have free speech rights, but not really. You want to speak freely, you got to go to this free speech zone. You want to do XYZ that we don't like at this given time, we can stifle that. Several bills have been passed by the legislature. Montana Supreme Court, or judicial system rather, has said those aren't constitutional because there's a section that says the Board of Regents that manages the university system, doesn't get to regulate that, or at least is exempt from regulation by the legislature. So they get total power when it comes to the Montana University system, although they get hundreds of millions of your tax dollars. So the Constitution doesn't apply, but they definitely get all your tax dollars that they want. So the very same legislators who are so passionately saying this is a free speech issue, that this is an unnecessary censorship of a legislator on free speech grounds, all voted against a bill that would make campus free speech regulation constitutional by the Montana legislature. And that irritates me greatly. Because it's like, how
politicians being hypocrites?
Yeah, right. I mean, well, this is why I'm bald. Politicians being hypocrites. Yeah. I mean, it's just frustrating. I mean, like, I obviously, there's a lot of bills in legislative session. It's difficult to track them all. It's even difficult to have a coherent worldview when you're facing 2,000 bills in 90 days. That said, it's not like they're not being told, hey, this is a free speech issue, But unfortunately, Democrats have kind of gotten around to, they're in the first super minority. They've now decided we need to, make sure we resist all constitutional amendments no matter what. And we might walk out this session with a Republican supermajority of getting 0 constitutional amendments. Very frustrating.
That's wild to think of.
Especially after decades of Republicans harping on how bad our state constitution is, to then get the opportunity first in a lifetime, and they're just like, meh.
Just shows how divided everybody is, though, and even inside the party. You can't bring everybody together.
That's right. So how's that live feed going? Are we looking good?
I think live feeds, everything's working fine right now.
Yeah, Snapchats or not Snapchats. What are we talking about? Super chats.
Snapchat us.
Snapchat us. We don't have one of those. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, we've had, it looks like 20 people have come in, or no, 10 here. Cool. But yeah, no, it's super cool. I'm glad it actually worked. I was kind of nervous. I didn't know how this would all turn out. I hope the quality actually is working out well. But yeah.
Well, what I see is we got 10 concurrent viewers, but only 3 likes. Come on there. Smash that like button. Come on, guys. Share it. Let's get this thing boosted up. And if you can give us money via Super Chat, let's try it out. I'm just fine. Okay, so speaking of money.
I don't think we have that activated.
Oh, okay. We got to get monetized first?
I don't think that's a thing yet.
I
think we have to have like a membership thing or something.
Really?
Yeah.
Probably have to be monetized. Have a real following. Come on, guys. Make us a real following. All right. So speaking of money, First Republic Zombie Bank is still a zombie bank. Do you know the background on this stuff? You're the one who sent it over to me, Kyle.
My understanding as of right now is just that in Q1, with everybody fleeing all the banks, $100 billion about of money was in customer deposits was lost in that. Classic fractional reserve thing, wasn't there, no liquidity, boom. So then when their quarterly report came out, it was like, yeah, hey, we don't have any of the money. And then shares dropped 95% in the bank. Everybody fled more. There's nothing there. Which I think is just what we're going to see with more and more. Like, there's a contagion that's just going to keep spreading, and we're going to keep seeing more and more of this. I don't think this is over.
Interestingly, I did see several articles about the regulator's shock at how fast this is happening, right? Because information spread is so great, because you can get the information out about what's a good bank, what has assets, what doesn't, what is doing a good job, what's not doing a good job. that regulators can't respond as fast as the internet spreads information. And so now they're all panicky about, SVB, for example, was only 36 hours from solvent bank to bankrupt bank. That's crazy, right? Because think about it. I mean, bankrupts probably in the past were a day, a couple days, stuff like that.
I think Twitter probably exasperated it quite a bit because you have like all of the San Francisco VC guys that were just like, the banks are going down, all over Twitter. And, everybody in the tech world's all on Twitter. So I think it just made it go faster than you would expect it to.
Actually, Kyle, well, we got you. M2 money supply. Look that up. I just want to give it a gander. Just want to remind everybody why this is happening. Because one of the things that keeps that I notice is that a lot of folks, what we'll see is a news story that'll come up. This bank has failed, and we just see it as like, wow, greed's wild, huh? Like there's a background, there's a story. Why are these banks failing that we have to tell? Okay, so in response to COVID-19, the Federal Reserve injected $9 trillion of liquidity to back financial institutions. On top of that, Congress passed about $5 trillion in brand new spending. This graph that we have up on the screen here is the M2 money supply. Henri, you're our economics wizard. What's the M2 versus other measurements of money supply? You got that off the top of your dome?
I don't off the top of my dome, but it says here consists of M1 plus small denominations, time deposits. So I mean, there's just the difference in the M1, M2, M3 is just what they're categorizing as money.
Mm-hmm. Money available for people to spend. What's in your savings account to what people have in their checking account to how much money is in the economy at a given time.
M2 is the U.S. Federal Reserve's estimate of the money supply.
Right.
Which is constructed by summing currency, demand deposits, small denomination time deposits, and less individual retirement account, IRA.
Right. So what this shows, and you see that part where it goes really vertical in 2020, that's what we're suffering from right now. And then additionally after that, where we're seeing a lot of liquidity injections from both Federal Reserve policy and the fiscal policy of the federal government. Do you guys remember how many different versions of CARES Act we did? There was the CARES Act, which was probably the most legitimate because it was responding to actual, like a breakdown, like the economy shutting down because of, COVID and slow 2 weeks to spread. So what we're going to do is make sure people have money to pay their bills and stuff like that. Although I don't know why they didn't just do a tax holiday. That would have been a lot simpler. But instead of what they did is they said, hey, we're going to bring this thing together. And I think a lot of folks were like, hey, if you're going to shut the economy down, this is the next best bet. Let's give money directly to people who are most affected. Let's make sure we prioritize the least well off, that sort of thing. Well, that's not what happened. Then they said, well, we got to make sure the special interests are all right. Otherwise, this can't possibly pass Congress. We can't just benefit the constituents. We got to make sure Raytheon gets their beak wet, right? I don't know about Raytheon, but some group.
In regards to the question of why don't we just do a tax holiday, I think it's because it's less direct. Like if you're just giving people money, but it's also just like, thank you, government, right?
Yeah.
Like there's that feeling. Where if it's just a tax holiday, like you don't feel that right away.
Right. That's fair. So what I was thinking is that what I was trying to go with is that there was a point there where a lot of people could reasonably say, hey, this isn't such a bad deal because we are shutting down the economy for 2 weeks. And then it went to 3 weeks, and then to 4 weeks, and then everyone's like, "This is nuts." And then we had another one, CARES Act 2, otherwise known as, I believe it was the HEROES Act, and then there's a whole bunch of other acts that did exactly the same thing, spending more and more money, trillions of dollars, printed out of thin air on the federal just debit card that were then injected to the economy. By the end of it, guys, we were spending hundreds of billions of dollars just bailing out state pension funds. Think about that for a minute. We were like, because of COVID-19, we can't have our pension funds not balanced enough, and we've been underpaying into it for 50 years. So therefore, let's make sure that we use this moment where apparently no one cares about spending anymore. And the what was the school of money that was so popular 2 seconds before COVID?
Modern monetary theory.
Modern monetary theory, which pretty much says you just print money and there's no consequence.
Popular. Yeah.
Is it still popular?
I mean, I think that's still in the central banking circles.
Oh, I just not seen it anymore. I was seeing it on Twitter about how that's the new thing, but I don't see it anymore.
They'll put whatever jargon they need to justify the money printer, right?
It is the state religion.
Yeah.
So
they'll just call it a new thing the next time, right? Actually, I forgot. Yeah, you're right. It's the CARES Act, the HEROES Act, and the HEALS Act.
The HEALS Act, yeah. So this process is what set up our current moment, because you blew up the money supply, the quantity of money, and now what we're seeing is a response to that, inflation, and the general price increase as you increase the money supply, and now we're seeing the response to inflation to slow it down, which is the interesting component of there with Zelensky prank call with our current Federal Reserve chairman. I don't know how they did this. Did you check who did this, Kyle? Have you seen that?
No, I didn't check who did it.
Yeah, I kind of looked around. It wasn't exactly clear, but some guy with a very bad Ukrainian accent somehow convinced Jerome Powell that he was Zelensky, the president. Is that the right word? Prime Minister? Head honcho.
I think he's president.
Yeah, president of Ukraine.
Whatever the executive is.
To do a phone call. And it's been posted on Rumble. And there's Jerome Powell, our the creature of Jekyll Island himself, talking to what he believes to be Zelensky. We're selling guns.
Keep talking as I look.
Is this going to get us banned for streaming Rumble on YouTube?
Oh, that's a good point. I didn't even think about that. Keep talking as I let this ad go through. Is this an ad?
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like
Yeah. I'll mute it and
let
let the ad go through.
So with that, the chairman, and this is a longer video, so I'll summarize real quickly, kind of the high points, that the chairman admits to at least 2 more upcoming interest rate hikes. Now, right now, everyone's freaking out about the current interest rate hikes. Banks are failing in part. I mean, well, we talked to Brad, SVB failed in part because of the interest rate hikes and how that devalues existing held bonds, followed by a long period of high rates with significant negative effects on the U.S. economy and U.S. labor market. We're going into recession, folks.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the writing was on the wall when they had to change the definition. I'm old enough to remember when the definition was changed on Wikipedia, and I actually went back in the Wikipedia, and you can see all the change logs, right? And there was like an actual war in the change logs of changing the definition of recession when all that was going on last year. Like, you could watch it happen in real time. It was fascinating.
Wow.
But here, I pulled up the Jerome Powell clip here.
On your opinion, which countries also suffered more from recent political situation and in economy?
Well, I would say not the United States. You know, we have our own energy here, and so it's really not us. I mean, it's going to be the Eastern European. You know better than I do, but it's going to be Poland and the Eastern European countries that are right there in close to Ukraine. I would think they're the ones who have suffered. I'm aware that Ukraine's suffering is. I mean, I can't personally experience it, but we all see what's happening. You know, people like me just want to support you in any way we can. But I have limited ways to do that in my professional job.
So I just talked to Christine Lagarde recently, and she told that they have already tried to minimize inflation. It's they got already around 7% inflation. It's a prediction for them, but there are a lot of many countries. So what do you have your prediction about inflation in the US?
I do, yes. Our policy rate quite a lot last year in order to slow the growth of the U.S. economy and enable inflation to come down, and we think that's working now. And I think we're very much on track to get inflation back down to our target, which is 2%. A lot depends on what happens in Ukraine on that, and what happens with Russia and their energy, and also with the opening of China.
If the rate is raised further, the standard of living of the population will fall. So how much should it fall in order for the Fed to stop raising the rate?
You know, we've raised rates quite a lot, and the market is already pricing in two more quarter percentage point rate hikes. We'll look around after we make those two, and we'll say, should we do any more? And then the question will be, how long do we keep rates at this level? And I think we'll keep them there for quite some time.
Because the decrease in inflation is clearly less than we would like. And if it starts to rise, is the Fed ready to raise the rate sharply again?
Yes, of course. We if we need to raise our rates more, then we'll absolutely do that. We raised rates very sharply, historically sharply last year to get to the place we're at now.
In other words, does the Fed think that inflation should be reduced to 2% at any cost?
Well, so we think we do need to reduce inflation to 2%. That is our obligation. But I think the path there, as we walk that path down to 2%, we'll also be considering, not at this point, but a little further on, we'll be considering, the effects on the labor market as well.
Wow. He also, in the longer form, admits that Russian sanctions have failed, contra Biden's narrative, and that the recession, of course, so you notice it there, the recession is needed in order to stop inflation, which also is what Biden is saying isn't what's happening. He says we're not in recession and the economy's all great.
Yeah. I also would point out, they now are talking about 2% as the inflation target. And originally it was sort of the inflation ceiling back when, all the way back 3-4 years ago when, the CPI prints were always relatively low. They were using, hey, we have we can get inflation as high as 2%. Inflation is too low right now, according to their view of the world. And so, even before that big spike in 2020, I would say monetary policy has been off the rails for quite a while. And, this inflation limit, this inflation ceiling has now become a target. So it's more like it's the floor. And that narrative has just like shifted slowly before our eyes to where now we're just kind of talking past the sale of whether or not we should have even 2% inflation. Why would that be even a good thing? Like, why not have a little period of some prices coming down? I mean, that would be a very good thing for a lot of Americans.
But it's not my wage.
Right.
Well, and I'm interested to see how this ends up playing out in the elections too, because it's the economy, stupid. But like regular people in my life actually understand what inflation is now. Like this is a concept that your average person never really knew, that like they couldn't tell you what inflation was. But now like the average person is like, they're feeling it, they're seeing it, and like they'll use it in just like day-to-day conversation about what's going on in the economy. So there's like a certain like economic literacy rate that seems to be on the rise because of what people are seeing right now, which is interesting to me.
It was always strange to me. You would watch like Free to Choose, like the old school Milton Friedman PBS program in the 1970s. And he would talk to people and everyone would be talking about inflation. And it seemed like a real issue at the time. You'd do clips of news from the time and inflation would be on the news all the time. Price of energy, price of everything. And people would complain about it. We're probably entering back into that again. So this is a tremendous opportunity for people who are advocates for better monetary and fiscal policy to help the everyday person see that this is a government choice. This is a choice set by a private board of banks that set the money supply, and that this is the inevitable result of their man of system approach to the economy. Man of system's a reference to Adam Smith, but central planning approach. So, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to kind of piggyback, the Free to Choose series kind of came out after a decade of, which coined the term stagflation in the 1970s. And, it's funny because one of the things that also stood out to me with the Powell clip was he was talking about we've raised interest rates. I don't remember the exact phrasing, but something like historically, I don't know what he's smoking, but I mean, like, Volcker jacked interest rates up to 20%. I mean, and did so far more aggressively than anything, these quarter point and 50 base point and even like a 1% hike in rates is pretty tame in the history of monetary policy. If we were to do something like what Volcker did, I mean, everything would come crashing to a halt overnight.
Oh, it would wipe out so many people. Like so many people wouldn't be able to there'd be no liquidity in any of the banks that could be like we would see a massive purge in the banks. It would be much more so than this like slow rollout that we're seeing right now.
I had an interesting report about millennials specifically buying lots of what Brad suggested on his podcast when he was on with the podcast. Money market bonds. What was it that he suggested that people buy into for the higher interest rates? But those sorts of purchases to do like savings through a bank, because now you can do it at a higher interest rate, is now becoming a mainstream way of saving, as opposed to putting it into stocks or mutual fund.
I believe he did say it was money market funds. But yeah,
Brad, correct us. 3 minutes from now when you finally see this. We gotta get used to this live thing. This is wild.
I know, this is like we're just like freeballing it right now. We have no idea what we're doing.
Hey, we still have 7 concurrent viewers and 8 likes. That's what I want to see. Thank you guys. Good work. All right, so go ahead.
Oh no, never mind. Keep going.
So pivoting over, Biden, who is obviously being contradicted by the Fed chairman, is now running for president, shocking no one. And in the non-story of non-stories, I just have to say it because it's like you got this guy who is even worse at talking than I am, somehow who's president, and finds himself running, and everyone's just like, you know? I mean, like, what was the poll that you quoted earlier, Kyle? It was like he's got like 60% for Democrats as an incumbent running president, while RFK Jr. is sitting at 20-something.
Yeah, he was like 19. I will have to pull it up.
That's pretty weak.
Yeah, no, well, I think RFK's announcement and kind of just sort of rising popularity right now is probably why Biden announced that he was going to run again so soon. I mean, because originally they weren't planning on making the announcement until sometime in the fall. Just think about Biden if he was elected in 2024, he will be 82 years old. And, if he were to live out the entire second term, he'll be 86 by the time it's all done. I mean, I think there's got to be some kind of reasonable conversation to have about that's just too old for somebody to be leading this country. I mean, is that ageism?
Take it easy, Don Lemon. Okay, he's not past his prime.
Dude, he is. The prime is way in the rearview mirror for Joe Biden. Yeah.
Well, you can tell by looking. I mean, I don't want to hate on anybody. I try not to do that. Even politicians I disagree with a lot. But man, I mean, the guy's like shaking hands with ghosts over here. Like it's not even close to a sane decision to run for president at this juncture, given just how many beats he's lost. And I feel bad. I mean, I feel bad when I feel old. I mean, I can't imagine being in the situation where you're trying to run for president again.
It's like we brought it up a couple episodes ago about just kind of the sort of Ceausescu sort of president, where he's a guy who rose to prominence not for any kind of special ability or exhibiting some kind of excellence, but more of the opposite, for being mediocre and being somebody who can be controlled. And so I think that there are the people who are really running the show behind the scenes of the Biden administration who, of course, they want to keep Biden and have him run. But if you're a voter, if you're a Democrat voter, how do you not have concerns over not just his age but his performance? Everything that he's talking about running on, you could flip it around and just say, well, why haven't you brought back manufacturing? The talking points that he's talking about revitalizing the economy. It's like, you're the president right now.
Yeah.
Who are you running against?
I think that's right. Additionally, that the other major talking points that he used was that Republicans are a danger to democracy and a threat to abortion rights. Any Democrat could run on that message. Like, that's not something that only he can bring to the table. Literally anyone can. In the fact that RFK Jr., beyond having the Kennedy last name, the guy's voice sounds worse than Michael Savage. I don't know if you know who that is, but he was a talk radio host. I think he might still be. but it's just a terrible voice.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
it
not,
just
not,
sounds,
not to be mean to RFK, but yeah, he's got like a vocal
yeah,
condition.
yeah.
Well,
It
and
just
that's
doesn't sound
The
good.
problem is that the position is a speaking gig, and people are
Uh-huh.
going to judge it based off of that.
Yeah.
But oh my God, if debates happen between RFK and Biden, they're not going to. But if they happened and
Yeah.
RFK is just out there like, the people backing you are the people that killed my uncle, you know, like it's gonna be wild.
It's gonna be wild. Yeah, we are.
They will
living
never let that happen.
in the
No,
most
no, they've
ironic
already said
universe.
that there's not going to be debates, I believe.
Yeah.
on
And
the
that would be
Democratic side.
outrageous if you're a Democrat. Like even a Democrat who's open to Biden, but also open to RFK. Like, are you really gonna Democrats? Are you really gonna let the party elite choose your candidate again?
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing says that the president has to be in for 8 years. I know we've done that the last couple times. It doesn't have to be that way. We've done it before, switching horses midstream. That whole
Well, and I think
stereotype.
everyone understands we're in a Weekend and Bernie situation, right? Like everyone understands that. I don't think anyone debates that, not even Democrats.
I think that's right. The only thing that's debatable is whether or not AOC really does believe that Fox News should be censored by the federal government, or is she just, talking to get views? What do you guys think? Is it legit? Did you see this video?
I don't know. I'm not sure if I saw the video that you're referring to.
Oh,
I mean, I did see that she was very happy to see Tucker Carlson taken off the air, and very much in support of deplatforming.
Dancing. She says it worked.
Yeah.
Deplatforming
And
worked.
she's so wrong about that too, because Tucker Carlson is going to. I mean, his career is far from over. Whatever he's going to do next, which will likely be, if I had to guess, some kind of independent project. I mean, he's going to go on to start the next The Blaze or Daily Wire or something along those lines, and I mean, his voice will be as loud as ever.
And anybody, unless you're offering him $100 million, like it's
Right. No, and that's the other thing too.
He's worth more than that.
He's going to
probably.
make way more money working for himself than he was going to make.
He could start a website with a subscription service and it's just like instant $100 million. Like,
Yeah.
like he's got so much power when it comes to the media landscape right now. Okay, here's the AOC clip right here. So
the face.
That's a good face to keep it on right here. It's got the crazy eyes. All right, here we go.
Federal regulation in terms of what's allowed on air and what isn't. And when you look at what Tucker Carlson and some of these other folks on Fox do, it is very, very clearly incitement of violence. Very clearly incitement of violence. And that is the line that I think we have to be willing to contend with. Federal
Yeah, no, I did actually hear this. What is
Worth noting that's Jen Psaki, former press secretary for the White House too. She's talking to.
That's the interviewer?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that's Jen Psaki,
Oh.
right? And she's just like nodding in agreement with it.
It looked like her.
Yeah.
Wow. Talk about a puff piece. Puff piece.
It's I'd like to know, like what's one example where Tucker Carlson incited violence on his show?
You don't need evidence for accusations in 2023. That's not how it works.
So is that how it works? You just say they incited violence and now we can shut them down? I mean, jeez.
I think every side is currently leveraging that. And loud voices are violence, speech is violence. Everyone's now dealing in this.
So what about the protesters in the Montana State House who were throwing things at the representatives and shouting down and
yeah.
Was that violence? Was it incitement to violence for Zoe Zephyr to,
Some people are making that argument, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, to hold up the microphone and like kind of egg them on.
Yeah.
That's kind of that's how they're seeing it. Now I that might be a little over the skis. Might be a little much, but that said, the House of Representatives, particularly the Speaker of the House, has the right to say, "Hey, quiet down," and if you don't, you're going to leave. That seems reasonable.
Something Emily in the chat just said. Do you think that Tucker Carlson will run for president? I have seen a bunch of people put that idea forward. I'm doubtful of it.
Yeah.
Like he moved to Florida like hush hush over the last few months. And I've seen a lot of people saying like, oh, he might be a VP candidate. I'm personally doubtful of that. I think he just has more power as a media man. Like, I don't think the president really has as much power as people often kind of think it does. And if you're somebody like a Tucker Carlson with such a wide audience, you can make so much more difference doing what you're doing in the media, especially if you capture the attention.
Especially a longer time horizon, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. President's got a lot of power.
But
I mean,
we're also
it
just
comes to a
talking.
point
We're also talking about this
he's-
weekend at Bernie's thing with Joe Biden. Like, there's a whole apparatus that exists around the president
Yes.
that really stifles a lot of what the president can do. And I think Trump is an example of
Yeah,
this.
well,
Like,
and-
he had a lot of people around him that confined him throughout the presidency, right?
Right. And you can see that all over the place. You can see it in the story between Bush, Cheney, and the Bush White House. You can see it with the conflicts they have in the Obama White House between his chief of staff and him and Hillary and Obama. Like, every president has this internal dynamic of conflict of interest with their staff, and especially crazy with Trump. So I could agree with that. But that said, that I do think a strong leader in that position can make substantial transformational change. That said, over a longer time horizon, I think media might play it out more strongly.
Yeah. Well, then there's always we have everything that's coming out with the whole CIA allegations on JFK right now. Like, there is problems there, and that's kind of what RFK's entire candidacy is around right now, is that they tried to, well, he's straight up just saying they killed my uncle, but it is that thing of he tried to stop the wars, he tried to do all this stuff, and they wouldn't let him, right? That's one story that may or may not be true, but there is that aspect of things as well.
Yeah, and that's a huge anti-establishment move that's going to, I think, play a big difference in the dynamics of the race, especially given the fact that the guy's got the Kennedy last name. It's going to change a lot of the electoral.
It was like you say, Camelot will rise.
Yeah, that's a huge narrative for older generations. I mean, that's a big trigger. The killing of a city president, the assassination of JFK, is like what 9/11 is to us.
Yeah,
right. And you can't not remember it when someone brings it up. Like, the image is just there. And with that generation, kind of like the impact and the trauma of that, that Kennedy name just makes a big difference.
Well, and that was really at that time period, the only real kind of prominent, somewhat anti-war voice at the time, like the one that was trying to restrain the empire from going too crazy. Like, it was kind of coming out of the Kennedy Democrats at that point in time too.
I don't know enough about that, because I know there was some contradictions there too. I mean, I know he ran more aggressively.
You're talking
than
about
he
the
personally
people
was.
who supported Kennedy?
Yeah, the Kennedy Democrats were quite a bit more anti-war, from my understanding, and kind of anti-establishment at the time.
Yes, it's kind of like his civil rights record, right? It's contradictory, right? On sometimes he's saying things that are very much complimentary, and the other times he's actually working against it. He's a politician. He's doing political stuff. So I don't know.
Yeah,
I think
I think that's true. Like the politician-y, they don't necessarily always fit in the perfect box, and I think the system around them doesn't allow them to fit into the proper box that they even themselves might want to fit into. But
all right, yeah.
You got something else to say?
No, not on Kennedy. That's all I got. I don't know enough about it. I really got to I got to find a good Kennedy book and get some background there.
I know a guy that was a former CIA guy during the Kennedy times, and he was a big Kennedy Democrat because of how much he was trying to clean out the CIA.
And I've heard a lot about
he's
that.
He's dead now, but old age. He was involved in the secret wars.
Yeah.
Like, he's old.
Oh,
right?
wow.
Thought you were gonna say he had dirt on the Clintons too.
No.
But it's one of those things, there's so much accusation. It's difficult to tease out the conspiracy theories from what's the best evidence that we have that's the most reliable. And I've always kind of the older I get, the more it seems relevant. The more that it's clear that the FBI, the CIA, other agencies were, I got us off the stream now. We're on the algorithm. I said the words. My bad.
Oh,
I said the alphabet boys have been messing around in Twitter and doing the things that we've seen they're doing with, blowback, and with what they're doing, the knowledge from Seymour Hersh and others that they're in Ukraine. The more I've been interested in intelligence reform itself is the third rail, but it's probably one of the biggest issues sitting behind everything else going on.
It's a root problem that is very difficult to tackle.
And when people say the crux point, that the turning point for it was the JFK assassination.
That's what Ron Paul said the other week, right?
Yes.
He Ron Paul on Tim Pool's podcast said something along the lines of the framework for the empire change, the change of the regime, all started in the progressive era, but the actual act of the actual regime change that changed us from like this version of America to the next version of America was like the 2-year period around the Kennedy assassination, because you just started seeing all these people getting wiped out everywhere, which is interesting. It's an interesting framework for viewing American history.
On top of that, when my boy Ron Paul says, that the CIA assassinated JFK, I tend to listen. He's kind of been right about everything.
He's been right about a lot of things when it comes to foreign policy.
Words out of my mouth.
Yeah. So Congressman Matt Gaetz, speaking of the alphabet boys, Congressman Matt Gaetz asked about a warrantless backdoor searches to the DOJ Inspector General, which revealed that the FBI, God, I said it again, has done 3.4
It's too late. It's too late. We can just go all
searches,
in now.
over 1 million of which were in error. So I probably shouldn't have summarized the whole video. I probably should have just said, hey, cue up that video. But
all right.
We're learning how to do it live.
Yeah, we don't know what we're doing.
I want to get into the 3.4 million backdoor searches that the ranking member pointed out in his opening statement. Mr. Inspector General, how should the public think about those?
Well, I think what we've seen in the various public reports, and I'm limited in what I can say about what's public, which I think is one of the issues, by the way, that's worth talking about is transparency here. It's obviously very concerning that there's that volume of searches, and particularly concerning the error rate that was reported on in the last 2 years in the public reporting. Now,
that error rate was what?
I believe it was around 30%. I think fellow members, I think it's around 30%.
30%. I'm a lawyer, not a mathematician, but 3.4 million, about 30%. You're talking about 7 figures of error in terms of the searches. I'm wondering how many people can perform these backdoor queries?
I'm going to defer to board members because you have the review ongoing.
I'm afraid I don't have those figures at my fingertips in terms of the number of people that can conduct those types of searches. But I share the concern expressed in the question that we need to have greater safeguards, and I urge Congress to incorporate a requirement for FISA court review of these kinds of searches to protect Americans' Fourth Amendment rights.
4 billion backdoor searches, more than 1 million of them in error. If I represent to you that we believe there may be north of 10,000 people in the federal government that can perform those queries, would anyone here have a basis to disagree with that assessment?
No.
Whoo! 10,000 people. 3.4 million searches at 1 million at error.
All causing trouble.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is the lady there says, well, what we need to do is implement a FISA court process here. FISA courts are secret courts of the government that don't have any public accountability to rule on civil liberties issues, privacy issues, when it comes to a government request to surveil somebody with a national security agency and apparently not the FBI, which is pretty wild. That's because even the FISA court is a pretty weak read from what we know from the Snowden files, which is that it's effectively turnkey tyranny, where the FISA court check is just clicking a little box and it just says, hey, I'm going to do this. And that's all there is to it. That's a pretty shocking both figure from the Inspector General, but also the fact that we don't even have a FISA court check on the FBI conducting searches of American communications.
Yeah. It's have you ever seen the movie Brazil?
No.
Oh man, it's a great movie. For people who are liberty minded, it's sort of 1984-esque, but more I guess comedic. Anyway, I mean, the not trying to give away any spoilers or whatever, but the whole movie starts out with a guy getting taken out of his home by undercover feds, and it was like a clerical error. Basically like they were supposed to get Mr. Buttle and they got Mr. Tuttle instead. And it's that come to life in this story basically.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I think when we talk about this, and we've been talking about it a lot, what we probably have gapped on is asking the question, what is the ideal state for intelligence gathering for the state that we have, and what is the ideal state for the world that we really want to see, right? So the marginal step to me is something like a church commission that says these agencies need accountability. They need appropriate amount of transparency. They can't just say everything that looks at, that they don't like is now censored and top secret. Redacting and other reforms that will bring more into light, especially and at minimum, every congressman should be able to know what the intelligence agencies are doing. It is completely absurd that you have some congressmen who are completely ignorant and can't get access because they haven't done the right, they're not part of the right committees. It's just, you can't have a representative democracy and that situation simultaneously. Lastly to that, we need to reorientate. The next step beyond that is as Eisenhower's vision. Eisenhower, even during his time, was saying that the intelligence agencies used to be for gathering intelligence to keep Americans safe. Now they conduct assassinations and they try to overthrow governments, and they're doing all these things that they were never originally supposed to do. They were supposed to gather intelligence so that presidents had better decision-making powers because they knew things about the world. That's why we have like the CIA stat book. That was their job, was to gather stats, right, and knowledge about the world. Sometimes insider knowledge, sometimes more impactful knowledge than just stats, but still to gather knowledge so that decision makers who are appointed, who are actually like elected by the people, could make better decisions. So at minimum, that's what we need. And I would call on folks to advocate for that.
Well,
but, go ahead.
Like, yeah, that's the theory, is that the intelligence agencies were not supposed to be spying on on citizens and everything. But like the FBI was formed in 1908, and Woodrow Wilson was using it for spying on people and arresting anti-war propagandists and things like that. And that's, 5 years later.
Oh, yeah. Right. Eisenhower's a politician. He's telling a story.
Yeah. Yeah. Like the story is that it's not supposed to be turned inward, but in reality.
Yeah. And technically in this tape, he would have mentioned the FBI. He was mentioning the CIA. But,
CIA comes around much later, but there was an organization that predated it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, like, that's the thing is like the vision has to start with what is the America for? What is the point of our country? And what is their goal of the government? And then step there of like, what is the goal of any government, right? Should they have a goal? Are governments legitimate? Those are other philosophical questions. But if you're going to have one, what should be their role? Well, it definitely shouldn't be to rule over you like a tax cow that can't be trusted with privacy. That's a role for having the wrong opinions about things, especially.
Yeah.
Well, and there's also the element, like you said, we can't have a representative democracy in this type of state. I don't think we're ruled by oligarchs at the end of the day. Like that's the whole James Burnham thesis. We bring him up. It seems like every podcast now. Either you or me brings him up. Yeah. Worthwhile, most important political figure in the 20th century, in my opinion. Disagree with his prescription of things, but his description I think is pretty accurate. But this was his whole thing, is that we're ruled by oligarchs, and we're just kind of pretending with a mythology that we are otherwise ruled, that we have like this. It's all kind of a myth that we tell ourselves. It's a noble lie. It's like a platonic ideal that is bestowed upon us by the higher elites of what our system actually is. Like you got to give them a little noble lie to keep them, grounded.
So I'm hearing my mother in the back of my head, who gave me some feedback recently. It's like, you guys use too many big words. Slow down and define your words, or use smaller words. What's an oligarch?
Oligarch is ruled by few. Like that's the simple word.
Or elite.
Yeah, ruled by elite, which usually is an elite. It's ruled by an aristocracy of sorts. Like there's kind of this James Burnham's idea is that there's this circulating elite in society, and they all kind of promulgate the same idea. Not ideas, but the same idea. And people rotate in and out of it, but they are all at the cocktail parties together. They're all in the clubs together. They all have the same, and these are your Fortune 500 CEOs. It's your bigwig politicians. It's all these people that all come together, and they all hang out, and they all kind of absorb the same information together. They all read the same things together. And those people they share the same attitudes. They share the same ideas. There's a little bit of deviation, but there's like an Overton window inside that group. And you're not really allowed to go. Like, if you say, hey, I was watching this Tucker Carlson clip, they'll be like, you can't come to the next party, right? Like there's a group that kind of exists. And once you kind of make it, you quote unquote make it, or you're a Hollywood star or something like that, you'd had a big movie, you're invited to the party, right? And this is what James Burnham was talking about in the 40s.
Right. And his whole idea is that there's that's a natural progression, that humans necessarily do that because we're hierarchical beings that necessarily have to select for an elite in order to have a functioning hierarchy.
Yeah, and it's not like the secret Illuminati. It's just like a natural formation of how these systems tend to grow.
Right. That's why all the people from Harvard hired other people from Harvard in order to be CEOs of their company. And that gives the impression, especially if you're a leftist, that this system is rigged because there's there are barriers there, formal and informal. Some of them just network barriers, right? That your dad wasn't from Harvard, so you don't.
And that's actually a good point. He makes the point of like places like Yale and Harvard are breeding grounds. They're places for you to play matchmaker and get the proper blood together so that they all promulgate the same kids to come up into this, right? Like he talks about that I think in the Machiavellians. But yeah, that's what I mean by the oligarchy and the circulating elite, right?
So with that, if that's true, like what was the evidence of that? RFK Jr. is pretty good evidence of that, right? Like there's 350 million people, but we're like, you know who's best? This guy. This guy's the take on for Trump, and he's gonna immediately be popular because he has the right last name. You know?
Yeah.
I don't know if RFK Jr. would be the evidence. I mean, I would think like the Bushes would be the
that's
evidence.
Another good piece.
Well, he might be an evidence of somebody that's going away from the circulating elite, right? Like he should be within the circulating elite, but now he's kind of an outsider. And Trump is kind of an example of this too. Like the story of Trump's family's money is like a lot of it came from Fred Trump, his father or grandfather, and they're kind of like new elites. Like he's not somebody that was like existed inside of the hierarchy for generations, right? Like there are kind of like new New York elites.
Nouveau riche.
Yeah, so like there are kind of like, and Elon Musk I think is one of these outsiders. Mark Andreessen is another one of these outsiders. Some of these like new tech billionaires are some of these outsiders, but then some of them get clawed in. Like Sam Bankman-Fried got brought in and he became a Davos boy, right? Mark Zuckerberg I think got brought in and he became a Davos boy. But then you have like the Andreessens. I don't know where like someone like Dorsey would sit, but like there are defectors from it, right?
The idea of like the media coverage, for example, after Trump is that it was always that after Trump got elected, at all the cocktail parties, all the media was getting together and saying, how could we allow this to happen? Did we make this happen? And so then they're like, well, now our job is to make sure it never happens again, right? And when we talk about like that story, a lot of people will hear that like, that makes sense. That kind of contextualizes what I see when the media covers so unfairly what's going on with the right. And they see themselves as activists, and now there's like a cultural phenomena happening that I can't point to any given circumstance to, but when I kind of overlay that over the data set I see, I can see this pattern that makes sense. You're just applying that same argument to larger political institutions that also kind of exhibit the same behavior of inside, outside, who gets it and who doesn't get it. What it is like the structure and stability of the current system of the intelligence state, or of the tax code, or of the, the business code, and these other things that, create barriers, create a two-tiered society where people feel like they can't get access to the same amount of rights and privileges as a certain other group of people.
And we call it the rotating door. Like that's a common term in like the bureaucracy of like, oh, this person didn't do well at their job, they end up at the next thing, right? or like when we were covering the SVB thing, you had the Lehman Brother guy that ended up at SVB, right? It's all the same thing, right? Yeah.
All right. So Ukraine, new news came out, covered by the Daily Mail, that Ukraine took a plane, packed it full of C4. C4 is a very specific quantity of C4 block that may or may not be from America. That wasn't clear. Took that plane, put it on a pilot, automation drone system, and flew it into Russia within miles of Moscow to try to assassinate Putin, and failed.
Whoa.
And they found the plane. And it's like, woo, son. Heating up. I mean, obviously this is an escalation that's already happened, right? So like that, for example, when there were reports, I don't know how legit they are, but there were reports that there was an assassination squad out to get Zelensky at the very beginning. I don't know how that ranks between that one fighter pilot everyone thought was real for like a
The
few
ghost of
weeks.
Kiev.
Oh,
The ghost
yeah.
of Kiev, and like a legit report. I don't know. It's war, so there's a lot of disinformation, but I did think it was an interesting like touch point that this kind of dropped. No one really talked about it. It dropped this week. Very interesting.
I didn't
story.
even hear about it until you just said that.
And can you imagine if that was actually successful and it was American explosives that blew them up?
Well, that's the thing is like if you look back at World War I and how it started, there was just all these tensions everywhere, and then just like one big thing, Archbishop Ferdinand goes, and like that just sets everything off, right? One bad move could just be like, well, this group will then be like, well, now we have to do this, and then the next group is like, well, if they did that, we got to do this, and it just kind of all sets off, and all of a sudden, just like within a month, everything's just moving, right?
Right.
That's the concern here, especially when we're talking about everybody has nukes now, like.
Yeah.
And it becomes even more of a concern.
Extra
right?
dangerous. I mean, so World War I's a great analogy, right? So if you listen to Dan Carlin and his like background to history, he does the Hardcore History podcast. Highly recommend. He does this great podcast leading into the World War I and then covers through World War I. And what he describes is the alliance system and the trade bloc system that existed before World War I as this giant death machine that everyone was building, but no one knew that that's what they were building. Everyone was pursuing particular political short-run or, specific long-run economic and political interests. And what they ended up building was this machine that chewed through humanity on a massive scale and probably causing, for example, the Spanish flu. Beyond that, just the sheer war deaths and the sheer carnage of World War I. That machine was created step by step by individuals just responding to them. Now, let me give you the case that we've built this machine, and we're building it right now, and maybe it's even already running. Trump comes into office and says, that we shouldn't be enemies with Putin, we should be friends. And so the left says, you guys, you Trump, are a Putin admirer, and you want to be Putin for America, and you're a terrible person. And he says, no, I'm not. I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put sanctions on Russia, and I'm going to give weapons to Ukraine, and I'm going to tear up this nuclear treaty, or I'm not going to rejoin the START treaty. I'm going to do all these things that actually increase tension with Russia to show you that I'm not a Russian agent. And we just add a little bit to that machine. And next thing we know, Russia's like, why are you putting NATO into Ukraine? I told you, net means net. Neither Ukraine and NATO nor NATO in Ukraine. Right? You can't do this. And then new president comes in and they're like, this guy's definitely not going to change course, so we might as well go in. That might be where we're at. Am I right?
I think you are right. And I always remember the clip of Putin. There was a clip of him saying, like, I've been through 3 different U.S. presidents. They all say that they're going to do this or that, but at the end of the day, like somebody gets in their ear and then they're just along the same track. But then also you have even Putin's biggest enemies inside of Russia also believed that "niet" means "niet." Like this is a big thing. It's a red line for everybody, even his most liberal critics. So when we're coming forward and we're pushing into Ukraine with NATO expansionism, we almost gave Putin political support inside of his own country because even his critics agree with him on this.
Yeah.
And now they're all binded together and bonded, right?
When we mention net means net, what that is a diplomatic cable that was released by WikiLeaks during the Obama administration, where they were talking about the proposal to add Ukraine to NATO. NATO is a defensive alliance, but it's been expanding very gradually eastward, pretty much since day 2. So with that, there was a cable from the guy who's the diplomat from Russia to the Hillary Clinton Secretary of State saying, "Niet" means net, no means no. That he could not find a single person anywhere in Russia who felt that it wasn't a deeply provocative and security state intelligence crisis to put NATO into Ukraine or Ukraine into NATO. Like what I mean by that is either put weapons in Ukraine from America to arm Ukraine against them, of course, or to actually formally introduce membership. Either one of those options are completely non-negotiable for those. And yet they went and did exactly the same thing with the Bucharest Memorandum. And then they failed at the Kiev, the Minsk Accords 1, the Minsk Accords 2, and then they find themselves in a situation where they're overthrowing government there in 2014 that happened to be pro-Russian, banning the Russian language, and then, everything that's been going on in the Donbass that's killed tens of thousands of people over that time period. And you find yourself at the situations like these are just more and more pieces. Additionally, that Trump adding tariffs to China, and what that does to drive Russia to China together. That's just adding to that machine.
And you just made me think of, too, I remember seeing something a few days ago about all these new countries entering BRICS, too.
Yes.
Which adds into everything that we've been talking about on the financial side.
So
right?
Russia and China are already part of BRICS. But yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Like expanding.
No, like it was like 26 countries or something.
Yeah,
signed a charter.
Yeah,
or
yeah.
Something.
And we've covered a little bit of BRICS before, but BRICS, real quick, is just it's a financial trade block of sorts that has generated out of the interest group of finances to say, like, here's some interesting places that you can, interesting emerging economies you can trade in and buy into and add your capital to. And they're relatively stable and relatively, safe investments. I don't know if that's true for China, but they basically out of that form this kind of informal alliance. And there are some arguments that happen on the internet that this is going to represent the new non-unipolar moment. I don't know if we want to call it a bipolar moment because that sounds extra scary, but a non-unipolar moment anymore for America, where America's no longer the global hegemon, no longer the top dog, no longer the person running the security of the globe. And what the competition of that might be, this BRICS system. Obviously speculative. We don't have any evidence of that quite yet, but they do have an international settlement that competes with the IMF.
Okay, so yeah, BRICS draws membership bids from 19 nations before the summit. Algeria, Egypt, Indonesia have asked to join the group, and there's a bunch more too. I'm limited on my viewership on Bloomberg here, but yeah, it's crazy. But you also, like, if you also just think about like the game theory of it, if you're one of these like countries in the middle of everything, right? Everybody for so long has been like, well, America's the biggest one on the block. So I'm just going to get behind them regardless. Sorry, China. It's just kind of how it is. But now everybody's kind of like hedging their bets, it seems like. Like Saudi Arabia is starting to do a little bit more deals with China, like we're just it's just like piece by piece, everything's just moving on the spectrum slider a little bit towards another direction.
Yeah, what you mentioned there with China, China negotiated a normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia, an ally of America, since we helped the Saudis, a family in Saudi Arabia, conquer that peninsula forever ago, and has been an ally ever since. Negotiate a trade deal with Iran. Think about that for a minute. That's a huge. That's wild. That's a very change. This is the Sunni versus Shia conflict, not resolved but normalized from a heightened level. Additionally, that French Prime Minister Macron pretty much, I think I talked about this last time, pretty much came out and said, hey, we're kind of on China's side here. So, and it comes to, we're not going to be backing America on Taiwan. So huge changes. We might be running into World War III. I hope not. That's not true. I'm trying to look at my stuff. Okay. So I do have some white pills for you guys though.
Dish them out.
South Carolina looks ready, and this might be breaking news for a lot of folks because I haven't been able to find any sources on this, but I do have inside sources that tell me that South Carolina looks ready to end certificate of need laws this year. Certificate of need is a very interesting state level policy. Basically says, hey, Henri, you're an existing hospital. You provide medical services to Bozeman. I'm a new startup, and I want to come in, and I want to have CRT scanners, and I want to have this new small clinic that I'm going to bring on because I'm a specialist in this area, and I want to compete with you for CRT scans. And CRT, is that the right word? Yeah.
Critical race theory scans?
Yeah. So when I come in, I can't just start my business. I have to first go to a commission and then justify my existence of my business to that commission because you currently have what's called a certificate of need to service this area. And so for me to come compete with you, I have to go to this commission and get their approval of these government people, these usually elected representatives, to get my access to compete with you. And then you get to show up and say all the reasons why I shouldn't exist. We shouldn't be able to compete with you. And of course, you're an incumbent, so you probably don't enter the campaigns. That certificate of need is one of the most cronyist, crazy systems implemented in the 1950s and 60s to end the dog-eat-dog inefficiencies of capitalism. States have been slowly chipping away at them ever since.
Does it look like other states will follow suit if South Carolina does it?
Hopefully. Well, South Carolina's kind of following suit. Montana ended certificate of need in 2021.
Okay. That's good.
Tried to pass it twice before then, but finally got it done in 2021. So that is going to be ending. I don't know how wide-reaching it is, but I do hear it's a transformational reform, so that's really great news. Additionally to that, Iowa will finally be allowed to sell of raw milk. Oh, yeah. Raw milk, baby.
Evan's clapping from the back.
Okay, all right. So I'm a passionate believer that if people want to be able to drink raw milk, why is the government telling them they can't? It's just the amount of like treating adults like babies. So you can only take so much of it. And for years, actually, I fought to try to get raw milk legalized in Montana. I don't even drink the stuff. I just think it's absurd.
I was there with you. I've never done it in my life, and some people in the chat here were with you as well. So I was there for the raw milk, the early raw milk wars.
So yeah, the raw milk thing. I mean, that Iowa, which is an even bigger ag state in Montana in a lot of ways, with less diverse economy than us, I think, is finally going to be ending their ban and control of that. And what usually happens with raw milk is you have large dairy producers that have contracts to pasteurize their milk, because that's what all the FDA stuff really required at one juncture. And then basically they lobby the government to keep raw milk illegal so that everyone has to be forced into their kind of style contracts, and they don't have the competition from the smaller dairy growers that are more likely to offer raw milk solutions. So yeah. Are we frozen?
No, yeah,
No, we're good.
We're good. It's
Going
just
good.
I moved this up on, so it's just
Oh,
being
man.
weird on my end. But
All right. Well, that's your white pill today. So
yeah.
without Joe to keep us on task, we've actually done a pretty good job.
Yeah,
I feel like.
yeah.
Okay.
Speaking of white pills, I'm reading the book right now.
Okay.
And I know you guys have just read it, and we were talking about maybe doing a thing about that, right?
Yeah, let's do that next week.
Yeah, next week I'll
Yeah.
binge through the rest of the white pill, and we'll people can join us live again, right?
For a
now that we actually have live.
about the white pill.
You don't have to have read it. We're just going to be talking about it. It's a lot of like Soviet history and things like that, of how actually tragic it really was. But yeah, no. Speaking of the white pill.
Yeah, the rise and fall of the Soviet Union. I mean, you can't really have spoilers for like a historical event, but like,
It ends pretty good though. I mean, what it is good is the ending is really satisfying. I know you read it now. When you get there, get to that last chapter, like, white pill,
Well, the crazy thing to me, and I think this is, and we'll talk about this again next week, but one of the craziest things to me is just how much the American and the British intelligentsia and the elite class were just running cover for the Soviet tragedies that were happening, and how they would not listen to anybody being like, millions of people are dying right now, people are starving, all this stuff, and they would not have any of it. Like, you'd get booed out of the room if you even brought this up. Like, that's the crazy things about
even
it.
today, that's like a meme where you'll have somebody who escaped communism. There's literally you've all seen the meme where it's like the guy who escaped communism talking to some woke person, and the guy who escaped communism is like, literally millions of people died, and then the woke person just says no.
Right. Or it's just like Yao Mi Park. Like, people will like criticize her. It was like, this girl escaped North Korea when she was a teenager and was like sold into sexual slavery and all this stuff. Like, crazy story. And you're gonna be like lecturing her about communism and all this stuff. It's wild. But yeah, a precursor for what we're going to be talking about next week, because I think it's going to get kind of dark on some of the stuff we're going to be covering.
Little appetizer though, so please tune in. Thank you. Don't forget, comment, like, subscribe, share with your friends. We want to grow this thing, give people good liberty content so that they can understand the news from a libertarian perspective, understanding libertarian philosophy, economics, history, all the good stuff. We want to grow this thing, so please go on to Liberty Portal. Buy yourself a book. Go buy the white pill on libertyportal.com. Help Kyle get access to some cash so that he can get past that paywall at the Washington Post. So we can grow this thing, and we can do more. We're really excited about this project. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.
Peace out.
Peace.